factors of their security.
That's the word I was looking
Do you
for.
people on this panel foresee the day in the foreseeable future when the Israelis will have to negotiate with Hamas?
Well, the way that the Israeli authority is behaving is it would prefer to cease to exist before negotiating with any Islamic trend in the area.
Yeah. I was going to say optimistically that's the way I would see it, because pessimistically the Israelis are going to arrange it so that no negotiation is possible.
That's not what the...
I would say that if the PLO, I should distinguish between the PLO and the PNA. I think that's a very important distinction. The PLO represented 6 million Palestinians worldwide. The PNA represents 2 million Palestinians, technically, I mean in terms of being an official entity within the West Bank and Gaza. So I think it's very important to make that distinction.
And what does Hamas represent?
Hamas represents an opposition to that official policy. If Hamas were to take over there, then Hamas would also represent those 2 million people officially as a replacement authority for Arafat's. But the point that I really wanted to make is that I think if the PNA does not survive, if it is wiped out by this process, the opposition or the collision between Israel and Hamas, in which it's currently standing in the middle, I don't think that Israel will negotiate with Hamas. I think that Israel will look to Jordan to help it to cut off Hamas. I mean, the object of them is to destroy Hamas and not to negotiate with it under any circumstance.
And what's the goal of Hamas?
The goal of Hamas is to probably get some kind of a national self-determination and equitable type of future for the Palestinian people.
I think that Hamas represents an idea, and as to how many people it represents is a reflection of how many people are embracing that idea, something that polls are being taken from time to time and the numbers go up and down. And as the PNA becomes discredited, more and more people are embracing the idea and are de facto represented by Hamas.
I think I disagree. I think I want to disagree on this point. I think Israel will negotiate with Hamas at one point. But Israel, they tried to milk it all the way until they get whatever they want to from the PLO or the PNA for that matter, because the PLO, to my understanding, I think died.
Isn't the real goal of the Israelis to divide and rule, just like when the British first came to the Middle East? They played one Arab state, one Arab ruler off against each other.
Well,
and now Israel's playing one Arab faction and one Arab group off against each other.
Well, of course they're going to do that, but to the Israelis, I think they come up from different colonial point of view. It's not like the colonization of British and or other countries, because Israel is there on the land. It's going to stay on the land. They don't consider themselves as colonials per se, like the British, which is they can move back to Britain. Israelis, they consider this as their land, and they go from the zero-sum politics. They don't go from the different politics, either us or them. That's how they look at it for this point, and that's why I see it. I think the Israelis, as a matter of fact, in my opinion, they kept their dialogue with Hamas now, going in the territories where they had, and in Gaza where they kept their connection with the leadership of Hamas and the political leadership, of course. But Israel, they won't negotiate with Hamas unless that the military wing of Hamas would be modified somehow, somewhere, where to their liking. But at the political position, at political level, I think Israel will negotiate at one point or another with Hamas, because they recognize that Hamas represents more than just a military wing. It represents, to their estimate, even at one point where he had dialogue with the consulate here, in, the consular of Israel in Chicago, and his estimate, they said they represent about 35% of the people at least. That's just, And
if Israel does negotiate with Hamas, it's probably going to negotiate with this gentleman.
like Abu Marzook, and that's why it is really Israel in this point even. That's why I believe Israel, they did this. I don't think they're interested in Abu Marzook as to get him to Israel to get him for any trial. More or less they're trying to break this kind of things, and they try probably to negotiate with him. That's one of the probably reasons they want him back there, and that could possible, because Israeli politics is not the normal politics like we see in the United States or any other countries. The Israelis, they look at everything is in different perspectives, completely. It's not somewhere in between. Whatever it's the best interest of Israel, they will do it regardless who would like it or who doesn't like it. That's how the Israelis look at things.
Let me ask Ghassan. Ghassan, you're a secular person. I've known you for a long time. You've written for maybe 20, 25 years about Israeli policies, about American foreign policy. How do you view Hamas? You've never been directly, to my knowledge, associated with that movement. In fact, in the old days, not all that long ago, we all were pretty supportive of the PLO.
Well, yeah, I think we supported the PLO at the time because we were under the impression that the PLO was striving to regain national rights, legitimate rights, right of self-determination for the Palestinian people. We've now discovered that it wasn't really in their cards at all, maybe for quite some time. So in a way, people like me should accept that maybe I was deceived. I think now my perception is, and because of I think there is a difference between the PLO and groups such as Hamas. I think the PLO, in my opinion, lacked the ideological tie, the ideological content to really pursue an objective, which is not really terribly unpursuable, unachievable. I think when the history of the second part of the century is written, I think it is going to be obvious stated that the PLO was the only national liberation movement that has failed miserably at practically all of its objectives. So now I think the difference with Hamas is that I see Hamas still a national liberation movement, maybe with aims beyond Palestine, and why not? I think, if one studies the history of the Middle East has been a unit connected through Arabism, through Islam, for quite a long time. And I think the difference, once again, is that Hamas is motivated by an ideology which is not easy to defeat. I think we all know the term that you cannot defeat an ideology with bombs or Apache helicopters or whatever it is. And I think they would pursue, in my opinion, the national liberation objective more decisively, more committedly, so to speak, than the PLO did. That's really, and again,
that would explain why the Israelis wanted him arrested.
Once again, I don't know if someone has mentioned it. I think it is, Jerry Adams is a party to a movement in Ireland.
The head of Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Irish.
Which it has a political wing and it has a military wing. Jerry Adams, the head of the political wing, was received at the White House because it's and take into account the fact that the Irish were fighting against supposedly one of the closest ally of the United States, Britain. Yet Mr. Clinton and the U.S. administration and U.S. polity and government received Mr. Adams at the White House. And he comes there, walks with governors, etc., etc., and he's only...
And he has a beard, too.
He is the head He's the head of a political party which has a military branch.
Are you
saying... is the same, of course. I mean, actually, I don't want to take it from him. He said it himself on 60 Minutes. I mean, he said that while Jerry Adams is being received at the White House, and he is my equivalent with the IRA, with the Irish Republican Army, I am, because I'm a Palestinian and because my adversary is Israel, I am put in jail, in prison, and demeaned and called terrorist and all sorts of names.
And assuming he's extradited to Israel, and assuming the Israelis put him in prison, as the head of Hamas has been kept, the blind sheikh has been kept in Israeli prisons, don't you think they'll get away with it like they've gotten away with so much else?
I think they will get away with it, yes. I think they will get away. There is a theory, however, that Israel may in fact not want Abu Marzook. They are not, my understanding, and I could be altogether wrong, they're not pushing very, very, very hard.
But they win either way. He's out of circulation. Either he's in an American prison or he's in an Israeli prison.
Okay, but the answer to your question, they may really not want him there because his extradition to Israel under the circumstances may be actually more trouble for Israel than it's worth it.
But they win either way. He's still out of circulation. Hamas is still branded terrorist.
I think you're both right. I think you're both right. And the real point of this, I believe, that the arrest of Abu Marzook is part of the larger Israeli strategy of decapitating Hamas, of weakening Hamas at both the military and the political levels, depriving it of its capacity for leadership. The thing that they don't understand is that Hamas is not like other organizations. You cut off its head, it grows a new one. And that's when they start to realize that, then they're going to recognize how deep the roots are of Hamas in the territories, and not only that, but the general strain of opposition that Hamas represents. I mean, there are a lot of secular oppositionists now that would identify with Hamas's political goals, if not with its religious orientation. So they're also dealing with that factor.
There's another factor, though, and that is when you cut off the head, it doesn't necessarily replace an identical one. It's more likely to replace it with one more militant.
Which the Israelis had a habit, when the PLO was the PLO, of actually targeting the most moderate and the most effective leaders. People like Said Hamami, people like Issam Sertawi. These were people that the Israelis were trying to discredit. So one would assume that that's actually the Israeli goal, to further radicalize Hamas, to further create tension, to further create terrorism, in fact, to provoke conflict between Islamic nationalism and the United States.
And also they're trying to send another message by arresting Abu Marzook to the rest of the leadership of Hamas and supporters of Hamas, or anybody who thinks even about Palestinian cause as a cause, that we can reach to you anywhere you go, and we have the capability and we have the long arm, like they use that, all the Israeli leaders use that term. We have the long arm of Israel that can reach anyone, anywhere in the world. And this is a very main way of doing it, because the Israelis, they survived, always with the intimidation of their enemies all the time. I lived under the occupation, and for a while, and most of their policies toward the people, that always to intimidate us, and that they say, well, we can do this to you, and we can do that to you, and we can do this, and always they made sure that we get the message. And that's one of the reasons that actually led to the Intifada, because the Israeli arrogance got to the point that the people couldn't take it anymore. Because when they started for no reason, stopping people on the street, spit in their faces, let them hit each other, let the son hit the father, or use foul language against their mothers and sisters, which is the Arabs are very touchy on that subject. That we try to tell them, we are the rulers here, we are the boss, we are the masters, and you are nothing but servants. And where it got to the point to this. But that's I think with the shortcomings with the Israelis, they don't learn from their own mistakes, and always their policies will backfire on them. And they
will the peace process backfire on them? By the way, what was the peace process in all of your views?
That's what I was going to say. I think the word peace and process, with this, they don't even fit, because there is no peace for one, and there is no process. There was an agreement, I think, between the PLO or the Arafat per se. As a matter of fact, it's not even the PLO as a whole, and the Israeli government. And that agreement is not. It has more holes than anybody can even imagine. And get it through. So it's not a peace agreement. Peace agreement has to be with justice. It has to be with equality, and the other party of it, that has to have the right to say something and reject it. But in this,
well, okay, you say it's not a peace process, but the Israelis are known to have goals. The Israelis are known to pursue strategies. What are the Israelis doing? They call it a peace process. The Americans call it a peace process. The New York Times calls it a peace process. You don't.
Well,
but what is it then?
There's two goals they're trying to accomplish. First, the word peace process, the Israelis always they choose their words very carefully, so they can use them back. So anybody will be against this agreement will be called anti-peace, which is that's what's doing now. Everybody who criticizes the agreement, whether from Hamas or the opposition or secular or any other person, they will call him anti-peace. The second goal, which is the larger goal they wanted from that process, which is they got to it, that to break that barriers between them and the Arab world, the psyche, which is in the Arab world, that Israel has an enemy. Now they broke it to a certain extent with the governments, not with the people, and that's why they're mistaken. They're trying to get to the people to accept them as part of the region by forcing themselves on them, instead of they want to make the people love them through their government, which is as we said earlier, those Arab governments are not representative of the people. And look at Egypt, as for example, which has been over 17 years this agreement signed, the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, and to this point the two people, they cannot get along, because they're trying to force it on the people, because that was an agreement done between two governments, not between two peoples.
There was another goal, though, and that was and has been temporarily achieved, and that was to break the Intifada. Because the Intifada was a resistance movement that made Israel look very bad. And by having this current strategy, the Intifada doesn't exist at the moment, and if it were to come back, it would be a resistance against the PNA, not against the Israelis, and therefore the Israelis would not be the ones made to look bad. Instead, they would say, as they said during the invasion of Lebanon, Arabs kill Arabs and Jews get blamed.
Imam, the peace process, what is it in your view?
Well, the peace process is no peace process at all. You can't have peace in the absence of justice. I think the Israelis, they model themselves as the brains of humanity, are really in the bowel section of humanity. Peace needs justice, and justice cannot be done in the absence of the populations of the Middle East. Here you have in Israel what may pass as a semi-democratic process. Israelis go and elect their own government. Their government, to a certain extent, represents them in international forums, bilateral, multilateral agreements, etc. But here on the other side, when you look at these Arab governments, none of these Arab governments represent their own people. Now, are the Israelis as dumb as to accept that, and then as dumb as to sell that to the world at large? I mean, if that is...
Or is the world as dumb?
Or is the world... That's right. Or is the world as insensitive and as ignorant as to accept a peace process in which you have 250 million Arabs absent? The people in Egypt are fighting against their own government. What does the Camp David Accords mean when the people themselves are against the same government that signed the Camp David Accords?
It means $4 billion a year in U.S. arms and aid.
Yeah, to support the government. But does that trickle down to the normal Egyptian person who's living in...
Not for anybody who visits.
Okay, so that's the case.
But
So,
it's not really $4 billion. Let's correct. I think the United States gives Egypt 2.1 billion and Israel 3. That's direct $3 billion a year.
Yeah,
So when you
quite a
know-
bit of trickling and siphoning. But Ghassan, you've worked for 25 years for Palestinian statehood, ever since I first met you when I first came to Washington in the 70s. You've always stood for a peaceful settlement with the Israelis, for independence for the Palestinians, for equality between Israelis and Palestinians. So what's this peace process all about for you?
Well, I mean, there's really little to add to what they've said, but it is obvious to me, in addition to what's been said, that Israel, in order to pacify the Middle East, or in an attempt to pacify the Middle East, it has given Mr. Arafat and section of the PLO something to calm them down, to quiet them down, while they attempt to penetrate into the Arab world, into the economies of the Arab world, into the markets of the Arab world.
With Jordan and Oman and Saudi Arabia,
And
where they have
Qatar and
informal
Tunis
relations.
and Morocco, Maghreb, that is. Yeah, and I do not really think. I think had they been able to do that without even the little bone that they threw to the Palestinian leadership, I think they would have done it. It would have been harder for them to achieve that, but apparently Arab governments were predisposed. They were waiting for Mr. Arafat to do something, to sign something, so that they will jump on this whole operation and begin to hug and welcome Israel, something that we're seeing right now. So I think the PLO itself, apparatus, for quite some time now has ceased to be of any threat, to be quite honest. As a matter of fact, I remember an Israeli analyst, Miron Ben-Benisti, as a matter of fact, which we all know. When he was once in Washington, I was telling him about the PLO, asked a question about the PLO military capabilities, and he said, listen, PLO military capabilities, he said, as a matter of fact, we consider all of the Arabs' military capability as a nuisance, more so than a threat. He said, we see that, we conceive of that as a fly that comes to your nose, and that's practically his words. If the fly comes to your nose, you chase it, it goes to your ear, you chase it, it goes to your other ear. He said the fly could never kill you, but it just annoys you a little bit. So the PLO was really never a threat. And I think the agreement with Mr. Arafat and some of his colleagues, lieutenants, opened the door, unfortunately, to the waiting Arab governments to receive Israel. And I think that's probably one of the most...
They've been dealing with Israel for years.
Yes,
They've been dealing
they wanted
secretly,
it
but now they want it in the
open.
open.
Well, I mean,
You can't point
the
the finger.
Hashemites were dealing with Israel before there was an Israel, and then with the CIA. But what I hear all of you saying, and this I think is the bottom line, the peace process is a deception and is unjust. and for that reason is unstable. And for that reason, in the medium and long term, rather than the short term, is leading to more tension, more confrontation, more desire for revenge and for justice. And if I see the heads going up and down the road, one would then perceive much more conflict rather than much more peace.
Well, I'd like to comment on that. I think that peace for the American administration, as for the Israelis, means stability. It is the equivalent of creating a stability for the status quo to prevent any change in that status quo, whether it be by legitimate means or whatever means. And the fact is that I think the peace process will remain stable unless the people underneath there take a stand against it. It's going to be up to the people to do that because the governments are part of it.
Which they will do.
Intifada 2, is that what this is all about?
Not just in the Palestinian area, but generally throughout the Arab world. I mean, we see the situation in Jordan right now. As long as the people of these countries, however, if they talk about the fact of being against what's going on, but they don't do anything about it, then everyone's going to ignore them, and they're going to keep going down the same path, and there's no force in the world.
You're talking about revolution?
No, I'm just talking about a more vocal type of opposition to the to what's happening in.
It's not easy to be vocal when you're arrested, when each country has secret police, when the Muhawarat visits you and your friends. It's no secret that there is no free press in the Arab world.
But there still is some timidity on this issue. Sorry.
That cannot stay forever. I mean, look at an example here around the world. I mean, Iran, which is the Shah regime, was once the most brutal, actually, for the Iranian people, and has more security apparatus and layers against the Iranian, and it couldn't keep them down. People, in history, if we look at always in the history, people cannot be kept down forever. I mean, you can silence them for a period of time, maybe a year, 10 years, even 100 years. But sooner or later, the people, they will say enough is enough. And this is history everywhere. You cannot destroy a people. I mean, all the world tried to do that, to the Jews. They tried to destroy the Jews. They never can do that. It's God's will. People cannot be destroyed. You might oppress them, you might control them for a while, but at the end, they're going to come back and do something about it. And that's what's going to happen in the Middle East. That the revolution, yes, I believe there could be revolutions in the Middle East, and that's why Israel actually was mistaken. That might come as a shock. I think they're not looking at their best interest at the long run. They're looking at the short run.
The more brutal the repression gets, the more unstable it is in the medium and the long term. I think you were quite correct to make that distinction. And it's a common problem. Politicians very frequently pursue short-term stability, ignoring the long-term costs. When you get brutal in your repression, then the repression extends beyond your immediate enemies to other people who may not even be political, but who get to begin to oppose the government more and more vehemently as people that they know end up in prison. Take Abu Marzook. I don't know how many people who have know the man personally. I don't know the man personally, but there are people who know the man personally who perhaps didn't care too much about any of these issues, neighbors of his in Virginia, who when they suddenly saw him detained, suddenly get politicized. I saw this in the United States during the Vietnam era. People who had no position on Vietnam got very upset when students in Kent State got shot down.
Actually, just commenting on the situation in the Middle East, I mean, it's true that the Arab governments can, thus far, by and large, have succeeded, so to speak, in stopping their masses from doing something. But at the same hand, they cannot also force their people to do. They can stop them from doing something, but they cannot make them do something else, which is to normalize with Israel, to actually accept and deal.